On that fateful night, amid blaring music and dazzling lights, the man I loved with all my heart personally tore away the veil of lies and pushed me into the abyss of humiliation. And it was on that same dark night that I found my own light. The deafening music echoing through the lavish Greenwich, Connecticut estate felt like 1,000 needles piercing my eardrums. But that was nothing compared to the pain tearing through my heart. I stood alone in the middle of the ostentatious living room where the third anniversary party for my husband's company, Caldwell Developments, was in full swing. All around me were men in designer suits, glasses of bourbon in hand, the air thick with the smoke of expensive cigars, and women in dazzling gowns, flaunting jewelry worth a fortune. They were my husband's business partners and high society friends. In my simple, jade-colored silk dress, I looked like an outsider, a faded ornament in my own home. I clasped my cold hands, trying to stop them from trembling. Grant was with his closest friends, Pierce Dalton and Ryder Stone. The three of them, their faces flushed with alcohol, were laughing and shouting. They were a circle I could never fit into. To me, they weren't successful entrepreneurs but a pack of wolves stalking weak prey. Their leering gazes, which always roamed over my body, had always disgusted me. "Come on, a toast to our CEO, Grant. This empire he's built in 3 years is now an unstoppable force," exclaimed Pierce, a man with a budding beer belly and small, beady eyes, raising his glass. Grant smiled with arrogance. He downed his drink in one gulp and then shot me a look. It was a cold gaze, devoid of love, filled only with possession and command. "We should probably say that today's success is largely thanks to my wife, shouldn't we?" His friends let out a knowing, contemptuous laugh. "Well, she gets credit for running the house, I'll give her that," Ryder chimed in. "Your wife, what does she know about business? But you have to admit one thing, Grant. Your wife is looking more spectacular every day," Pierce added, his lecherous eyes raking over me from head to toe. "Yeah, it's a shame to keep such a beauty locked up at home. CEO, how about you give your brothers a treat tonight?" My heart stopped. I knew they were plotting something. It wasn't the first time. I lowered my head, pretending not to hear, hoping Grant would refuse. But I was too naive. A few drinks too many, and my husband seemed to transform into another person. He reveled in his friend's sick suggestions. He loved the feeling of absolute power over others, especially his own wife. He staggered toward me, grabbed my hand tightly, and dragged me to the center of the room, drawing everyone's attention. "All right, I'm in the mood tonight. I'm going to give you all a real show." He whispered in my ear, his voice as cold as ice, "Darling, do you love me?" I trembled, unable to look him in the eye. "Grant, you're drunk. Everyone's watching us." "I asked you if you love me," he growled, squeezing my wrist until it hurt. I replied with a barely audible, "Yes." He let out a savage laugh. "Then prove it. Let's play a game. Just take off your clothes and dance for us. If you do it, I'll sign that major development contract for your father's company right now." My father was gravely ill, and the small family construction business was on the verge of bankruptcy. Grant knew this. He knew it was my greatest weakness. He was using my family's survival as a bargaining chip for his vulgar entertainment. My body went rigid. My ears went deaf. I no longer heard the music, only the cackles of his friends and the sound of my heart shattering into a million pieces. Humiliation. This was absolute humiliation. I glanced at my mother-in-law, Liliana Croft, sitting on a nearby sofa. A smirk of satisfaction played on her lips, as if she were watching an amusing play. In all our years together, she had never treated me like a daughter-in-law. "What? You can't do it," Grant taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "Or was your love just a sham, too? Is your love worth less than a contract?" His words were like thousands of needles stabbing at my pride. Tears welled up, but I swallowed them back. Crying, begging that would only give them more pleasure. I had endured enough. For the past 5 years, I had lived like a shadow, silently bearing my mother-in-law's contempt and my husband's sick jokes. I thought my sacrifice would bring peace to our home, but it hadn't. My kindness and weakness had only emboldened them. Tonight, he had pushed me to the absolute limit. Suddenly, all the fear and resignation inside me vanished, replaced by a strange calm. It was the serenity of someone with nothing left to lose. Slowly, I lifted my head and looked Grant straight in the eye. My gaze was no longer fearful, but a chilling void. "All right," my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "I'll play your game." The entire room fell into a deathly silence. Even Grant seemed slightly taken aback by my easy agreement. He probably expected me to cry and beg. The smirk on his lips grew even more triumphant. That's my wife. I stopped looking at him. I turned to the silently observing crowd. The men's eyes were fixed on me, filled with greed and morbid desire. I took a deep breath. The thin, cream-colored trench coat I was wearing suddenly felt heavy. Slowly, very slowly, I raised both hands and gripped the lapels of the coat. Every movement was calm and deliberate, unhurried. The laughter had completely ceased, leaving only the sound of eerily sweet music. Everyone was waiting. They were waiting for my humiliation to be laid bare. Calmly, I removed the outer garment. The coat slid smoothly off my shoulders and fell to the floor. And then everyone in that room, my husband, my mother-in-law, and their depraved friends froze. The triumphant smirk on my husband's face vanished, and the wine glass in Pierce's hand dropped to the floor, shattering. Liliana Croft, who had been lounging on the sofa, shot to her feet, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she was seeing. The entire hall was plunged into absolute silence, a silence more terrifying than a scream. The atmosphere had grown thick and cloying, and the music, which had sounded sweet just moments before, now seemed mournful and somber. My coat lay silently on the cold marble floor, like a freshly torn piece of a soul. All eyes, once greedy and lecherous, were now fixed on me with undisguised horror. I was still standing in the center of the room, under the dazzling chandelier, but I didn't feel naked. On the contrary, I felt as if I were wearing invisible armor. Underneath my thin silk dress, what I showed them was not my skin, but a piece of paper carefully pinned to my chest, a white, standard-sized sheet. On it was a black and white image of a tiny life information, with a clear conclusion: 6 weeks pregnant. Fetal heartbeat detected. I was pregnant. After 3 years of longing, of countless secret trips to the doctor, of enduring my mother-in-law's cruel words calling me barren. Finally, heaven had taken pity on me. I had received the news that very morning, just before this horrible party. I had wanted to surprise Grant. I had wanted to share the happy news in a romantic setting. But he himself had ruined everything. You're pregnant? Grant's voice stammered. The arrogance and drunkenness had completely vanished from his eyes, leaving only stunned disbelief. He stared at the ultrasound picture pinned to my chest, then back at my face, as if trying to confirm whether this was real or some kind of joke. I didn't answer. I just offered a faint smile, a smile more bitter than tears. Why, Grant? The game isn't over yet. Do you still want me to dance for your friends? Every word I spoke was as light as a feather, yet it struck the room's silence like a giant hammer. His friends, Pierce and Ryder, now pale-faced, bowed their heads, unable to look at me. It seemed even their sick jokes had a limit. They didn't dare jest with a woman carrying their friend's child in her womb. But my mother-in-law, Liliana Croft, was different. Her shock quickly morphed into fury and malice. She leaped up and rushed toward me, her eyes bulging. Pregnant? Whose baby is that? Don't think you can fool our family with this trick. Who knows if this child is Grant's or some other man's? Every word she spat was a dagger stabbing my heart. Even at this moment, she was insulting me, doubting my faithfulness. Grant seemed to snap to his senses at his mother's words. He didn't defend me or refute his mother's slander. Instead, doubt began to creep into his eyes. She's right. Why are you only telling us now? Where have you been? Who have you been seeing? He joined his mother in interrogating me like a criminal. It turned out that in their eyes, I was not only useless but also a promiscuous woman. The love and trust I had given them for the past 5 years were worthless. The pain inside me transformed into a cold rage. I had held on to a faint hope that this child would be the rope to save our marriage, to bring him to his senses. But no. It only served to reveal their true faces more clearly. I didn't cry or try to justify myself. I knew any explanation would be futile at this point. Calmly, I unpinned the ultrasound from my dress, folded it carefully, and put it in my purse. Then, I bent down, picked up my coat, and put it back on with dignity. My actions surprised everyone. They probably expected a scene of weeping and pleading. I'm tired. Enjoy your party, I said, my voice strangely serene. I turned toward the stairs, leaving behind a group of frozen people and a chaos of suspicion and shame. I climbed the marble steps, one by one. With each step, I remembered the days when I first set foot in this house. I remembered the old Grant, a struggling but ambitious real estate developer. We met at a coffee shop bookstore where I worked part-time to pay for college. He had no money or status, but he had a sincere heart and blueprints filled with dreams. He won my heart with bouquets of wildflowers he picked on the side of the road, and with evenings spent sharing a piece of bread, dreaming of a bright future. He said he loved my purity, my simplicity, and my determination. He said he would work hard to give me a happy life. I believed him. I loved him with the pure heart of a girl who knew nothing of the world. My family lived in the Midwest. My parents were farmers. When I introduced him, they objected. They were afraid I would get hurt. But I disobeyed my parents and left everything for him. The day we got married, we had nothing but empty hands and a love that seemed eternal. We rented a tiny attic apartment and started our business. I spent all my savings and even sold the necklace my mother left me to help him set up his small development firm. The first few years were incredibly tough. I acted as his accountant, his HR manager, and I drummed up clients for him. At night, we would both be hunched over blueprints. It was hard, but we were so happy. And then his company started to see its first successes. We landed a big project, and the money began to flow. We moved from the humble attic to a condo, and then to this mansion. Our lives changed, and he changed too. He was no longer the simple young man from before. He started to care about his appearance and his social connections. He started hanging out with people like Pierce and Ryder, men he used to despise. He came home later and later, always smelling of alcohol and another woman's perfume. His mother, Liliana, also came to live with us after she was widowed. She hated me from day one. She always thought I wasn't good enough for her son, that I was a small-town girl who got lucky. When Grant's company succeeded, her contempt became more overt. She criticized everything from the way I dressed, to the way I walked, and especially the fact that I couldn't have children. Instead of protecting me, Grant always sided with her. "Mom's all alone. You just have to put up with it for a bit," he would say. My patience became a habit, then resignation. I fooled myself into thinking that as long as the family was at peace, all my sacrifices were worth it. I didn't realize that my silence was allowing the evil to fester. I reached the top of the stairs, paused, and looked down at the living room. The party was over. The guests had left in a hurry, not wanting to linger in such an awkward atmosphere. Only his family was gathered, whispering about something. I knew they were talking about me and the child in my womb. She was starting to weave a new trap, one more subtle and cruel than the previous night's humiliation. I slammed my bedroom door shut. The sharp sound echoed like a declaration of severance. I wanted to shut myself off from that false, malevolent world outside. I slid to the floor, my back against the cold wooden door. My body trembled uncontrollably, not from cold, but from extreme anger and pain. Everything had happened too quickly, too suddenly. Just a few hours ago, I was a wife eagerly waiting to give her husband happy news. Now, I was a woman humiliated, slandered, and doubted by the man I loved most. The child in my womb should have been the fruit of our love, the bond that held our family together. But now, in their eyes, it had become a thorn, a tool to continue blaming and tormenting me. I hugged my belly, where a tiny life was growing day by day. The tears flowed again, but this time they were not of weakness, but of hatred. "Baby, I'm so sorry. Mommy can't give you a good father or a complete family. But I will protect you with my life." Memories of the humiliating days in this house came flooding back, as vivid as if they happened yesterday. I remembered once, about a year ago, when I accidentally broke Liliana's favorite crystal glass. I had to kneel in the living room for 3 hours as punishment. Grant came home and saw me with swollen knees and a tear-streaked face. I thought he would help me up, say something fair. But no, he glanced at me and said coldly, "If you did something wrong, you have to be punished. Kneel, so you'll remember it for the rest of your life. Maybe next time you won't be so clumsy." That night, when I dragged my exhausted body to our room, he demanded I sleep with him as if nothing had happened. He said it was a way to atone for my mistake. I gritted my teeth and endured. I felt like a soulless doll. And I remembered my birthday 6 months ago. For the first time in years, Grant invited me out to dinner. I was so happy I dressed up with care. I hoped it was a new beginning, a sign that he still cared. But when we arrived at the restaurant, I realized it was a business dinner with his partners. For the entire meal, he talked business and toasted with his associates, leaving me alone at a corner of the table. After dinner, he was completely drunk. I had to help him to the car by myself. On the way home, because I took a wrong turn, he flew into a rage and insulted me viciously. He stopped the car in the middle of the Brooklyn Bridge, pushed me out, and sped off, leaving me alone in the cold night. I had to walk almost 3 miles before I could find a cab. When I got home, he was sleeping like the dead. The next morning, he remembered nothing. He just complained about why I hadn't changed his clothes before putting him to bed. The fragments of these painful memories pierced my heart, reminding me of my own stupidity and blindness. Why did I endure it for so long? Why did I keep clinging to a love that had died long ago? Perhaps because I was too alone. My parents were back in the Midwest and not in good health. I didn't want to worry them. I didn't have many friends. I had devoted all my time and heart to Grant and this family. I had isolated myself. I had locked myself in a golden cage, mistaking it for happiness. But tonight, the cage had been broken. The bird inside hadn't died, it had regained its wings. A painful truth came back to me. The night before the party, as I was getting ready, I overheard Grant on the phone with Pierce. The door wasn't fully closed, so I only caught a few words, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. "Don't worry, there's going to be a good show tonight. My wife's gotten a little rebellious lately. Time to put her in her place." "What kind of show?" "The usual. I'm gonna teach her a lesson she'll never forget, in front of everyone. Let's see if she dares to hold her head up after tonight." At that moment, I couldn't believe my ears. I comforted myself, thinking I'd misheard, that he couldn't be so cruel. But what happened at the party proved everything. The humiliation I suffered wasn't an impulsive act of a drunk. It was premeditated. He did it on purpose to degrade me and assert his power. He wanted to turn me into a submissive dog, a creature that only obeyed. His evil and cruelty were beyond human limits. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door, and Grant's voice came from outside. It was no longer a drunken slur, but calculated and sober. "Vera, open the door. We need to talk." I took a deep breath and quickly wiped away my tears. The performance wasn't over yet. I stood up and opened the door. Grant walked in, followed by Liliana. Grant's face no longer showed anger, but weariness and a false remorse. Liliana stood with her arms crossed, her expression frigid. He came closer and tried to take my hand, but I stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I was too drunk earlier. I didn't know what I was saying or doing. Can you forgive me?" Liliana cleared her throat and interjected, "He's already apologized. It's not a big deal. It's normal for a drunk man to say or do some exaggerated things. As a wife, you should be more understanding." I looked at the mother and son. One played the sinner, the other the judge. A perfect performance. I said nothing, just looked at them in silence. My silence unnerved Grant a little. He stepped closer and said in a more pleading tone, "Vera, don't be angry, you're pregnant. It's not good for the baby. It's my fault. It's all my fault. It will never happen again, I promise." Promises. How cheap were his promises now? But I knew I had to keep acting. I slowly raised my head, my eyes filled with tears. "You really promise? You swear you'll be good to our child and me, that you'll never let me suffer any injustice again?" He raised his hand and swore. I looked deep into his eyes, trying to find a flicker of sincerity, but there was only falsehood. I knew they were humbling themselves not out of regret, but because of the child in my womb. They needed a child. Liliana needed a grandchild to carry on the family name, to solidify her position. Grant needed a child to tie me down, to continue controlling me. I nodded slightly, my voice weak. "I'll believe you. But I need some time." Seeing my anger dissipate, Grant let out a sigh of relief. Liliana's expression also softened. "That's more like it. Rest now. You need to take good care of my precious grandchild." She said that and turned to leave, but not without one last jab. "To be sure, we'll go to the hospital tomorrow for another checkup. We can only trust our family's clinic." They had started their move. Even my unborn child had become a tool in their hands. This war was going to be far more vicious than I had imagined. The door closed, and a suffocating silence enveloped me. Liliana's words echoed in my ears, "We can only trust our family's clinic," the Croft Wellness Center, where she was a major shareholder. I understood her intentions perfectly. She didn't trust me. She wanted to control everything, even my health and the information about my child. A chill ran down my spine. If I went there, all my test results and information about the fetus would be in her hands. What could she do? She could distort the facts, stage another drama to harm me. I couldn't bear to think about it. I was like a fish on a cutting board, and they were holding the knife, ready to slice me up at any moment. I couldn't just sit and wait for my doom. I had to find a way out. But where could I go? My parents' home? Impossible. Grant and his mother would surely go there and pressure them. I couldn't cause them more worry. Amid the confusion, a name came to mind. My godmother, Augusta Shaw. She was my late mother's best friend. After my mother passed away, she treated me like her own daughter. Augusta was an extraordinary woman, a retired textile magnate who had once dominated the business world, building a massive corporation from scratch. She was retired now, but her influence and connections were still formidable. More importantly, she was extremely intelligent and perceptive, able to see right through people. From the very beginning, she hadn't liked Grant. That boy has cunning in his eyes. Be careful, she had warned me. But I was blind with love and didn't listen. Now, she was the only person who could help me. I waited until nearly midnight, certain that Grant and his mother were sound asleep, before I quietly opened the door and tiptoed downstairs. I didn't dare turn on any lights, guiding myself by the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. I used the landline in the living room to call Augusta. I was afraid to use my cell phone, fearing Grant might have installed tracking software. The phone rang a couple of times, and then I heard her familiar, sleepy voice. Hello? Godmother. It's Vera. My voice was a trembling sob. Hearing my voice, Augusta was instantly awake. Vera, what is it? Why are you calling at this hour? Did something happen? Godmother, I couldn't go on, just sobbed into the phone. Calm down, child, calm down. Take a deep breath and tell me what happened. Augusta's voice was firm yet had a calming power. I choked back my sobs and briefly told her everything from the humiliating party to the baby in my womb and Liliana and Grant's plans. I could feel a terrifying silence on the other end of the line as I spoke. When I finished, Augusta didn't speak right away. There was a long pause, then a sigh. And then, in a voice colder and more determined than ever, she said, I warned you, and you didn't listen. But crying now won't solve anything. Listen to me carefully. First, under no circumstances are you to go to that Croft Wellness Center. Tomorrow morning, tell them you're experiencing spotting and need to go to Mount Sinai Hospital, where the best specialists are. I will arrange for someone there to ensure all your information is protected. Second, she continued, you cannot divorce him now. If you do, they will kick you out with nothing and take custody of the child. They will use the excuse that you have no job and no assets to take your baby away. But I can't live with them for another day. I said desperately. You have to, Augusta's voice was like steel. And not just live, you have to perfectly play the part of a pitiful wife, a submissive daughter-in-law who has seen the error of her ways. You must make them believe you've completely surrendered, that you're clinging to this child as your last lifeline. When their guard is down, we will have time to act. Act how? I asked, not fully understanding her intent. Gather evidence, my dear, she said, her voice sharp with cunning. Evidence of his cheating and their dirty business dealings. We are not just going to divorce him. We are going to make them pay for everything they've done to you. That company of Grants couldn't have gotten where it is without some skeletons in the closet. I'll have my people look into everything. And Liliana, a woman that greedy and vicious is surely not clean. Augusta's words were like a powerful electric current running through my body. The despair and fear inside me slowly dissipated, replaced by a different feeling, anger and a thirst for revenge. She was right. I couldn't break down. I couldn't let my child be born without a mother or live in a family like that. After the call, I felt I was no longer alone. I had a second mother by my side, a powerful and ingenious advisor. I tiptoed back to my room and lay down next to the soundly sleeping man. I looked at his face, the face I once loved so much. Now, to me, it was just the face of an enemy. I'll act in this play with you, but the one writing the script and deciding the ending will no longer be you. The next morning, I woke with a clear plan in my head. I was no longer the confused Vera of the night before. I was an actress, and my role was that of a weak, frightened, and utterly dependent wife. I deliberately stayed in bed, frowning and clutching my stomach. When Grant came in, I whispered weakly, Darling, my stomach hurts so much. Grant rushed to my side, his face filled with concern, though I couldn't tell how much of it was genuine. What's wrong? Where does it hurt? I'll take you to the hospital right now. I don't know, I moaned. I just feel a constant sharp pain. Maybe it's because of last night. I left the sentence unfinished, letting him draw his own conclusions and feel guilty. As expected, Grant's face paled. He waved his hands hastily. No, don't think about that. I'll call Mom. She'll know what to do. He rushed out. A short while later, Liliana came in. She still had an unpleasant expression, but there was also a hint of worry. She stared at me, then placed a hand on my forehead. You don't have a fever. How does it hurt? It's an on and off pain in my lower abdomen, I said, forcing a few tears. I'm scared. Scared something will happen to our baby. Liliana was silent for a moment. I knew she was calculating. If something happened to this child, her plans would be ruined. Finally, she said. All right. I'll tell Grant to take you to the Croft Center for a full checkup. This was it, the decisive moment. I shook my head vigorously, still clutching my stomach. No, mother-in-law, I don't want to go there. That's a general wellness clinic. They don't specialize in obstetrics. My friends say that in the first trimester, especially up to 3 months, it's best to go to Mount Sinai Hospital. They have top professors, the best doctors. And their equipment is more advanced. I'm just worried about my grandchild. My words hit the core of Liliana's psychology, her grandchild. She could hate me, but she couldn't not care for the grandchild she had been waiting for day and night. Besides, Mount Sinai was the most trusted public hospital in the city, so she had no grounds to refuse. After a moment's hesitation, she reluctantly nodded. You're right. Fine, then we'll go to Mount Sinai. Grant, take her now, and make sure she's seen by the most competent doctor. Grant quickly agreed and rushed to help me up. I feigned weakness, leaning on him completely. During the car ride, I pretended to rest with my eyes closed, but I was actually texting Augusta to let her know everything was going according to plan. When we arrived at Mount Sinai, a perfect setup was waiting for me. As soon as we reached the emergency room, a very experienced-looking female doctor, Augusta's contact, came out to greet us. She introduced herself as the department head and said she would examine me personally. Grant and Liliana, who had come along to supervise, were completely reassured upon seeing her. I was taken to a private examination room. After the checkup, the doctor said with a serious expression, "The patient is showing signs of a threatened miscarriage, likely due to psychological stress. For safety, it would be best for her to be admitted for a few days of observation. We will provide the best treatment and therapy to protect the pregnancy." Hearing this, Grant and Liliana no longer hesitated and quickly handled the admission procedures. I was moved to a quiet, comfortable private room. Just like that, the first step was a success. I had freed myself from their direct control and gained a safe space and precious time. For the next few days, I played the part of a patient perfectly. I stayed in bed, reading, listening to music, giving no hint that I was plotting anything. Grant and Liliana visited me every day, bringing all sorts of broths and nutritious meals. They were strangely kind. Grant kept apologizing and making all sorts of promises. Liliana no longer criticized me but urged me to take care of my health for the sake of her grandchild. I just smiled silently and agreed. My submissive attitude made them lower their guard even further, believing I had completely surrendered. Meanwhile, on the outside, Augusta and her network began to move. Every night after Grant left, Augusta would visit me secretly, not as my godmother but as an old family friend. She brought me the first piece of information. "Grant," she said in a low voice, "that boy's company looks prosperous on the outside, but it's hollow. It's been running at a loss for several years, surviving mainly on large contracts secured through the reputation and connections you provided him. He also has considerable bank debt." And Liliana, she scoffed. "That woman is even worse. I had her investigated. It turns out she's a gambling addict, not back alley poker, but high-stakes stock market speculation. She has lost a massive amount of money and is now being hounded by loan sharks to pay up. They've given her a 1-month deadline." It all became clear. That was why they needed money so urgently. That was why they set their sights on my father's company. That was why Liliana was so desperate for a grandchild. She needed an heir to tie Grant down, and she needed Grant to pay off her debts. They weren't just evil people, they were cornered beasts, willing to do anything to survive. "So what should I do now, godmother?" I asked worriedly. Augusta patted my hand, her eyes glinting shrewdly. "Now is not the time to be hasty. Let them think they are about to achieve their goal. You rest here quietly. Your job now is to keep yourself and the baby absolutely safe. I will handle everything on the outside. A snake must be caught when it sticks its own head into the trap." I looked at her with a sense of complete relief and trust. I knew a bigger trap, a more terrible storm, was brewing. And this time, the person in the eye of the storm would not be me. During the week I spent in the hospital, I recovered, and the baby stabilized. I spent most of my time reading, studying business management and finance. The story of Grant and his mother had taught me an expensive lesson. I must not trust blindly, and more importantly, I must not lack knowledge. I had to arm myself to protect myself and my future child. Augusta visited me every afternoon without fail, updating me with the latest information. "I've had a tracking device installed in Grant's car," she whispered one afternoon. "That boy not only has suspicious business dealings, but he also has a mistress." My heart skipped a beat. I no longer loved him, but the betrayal still stung. "Who is it?" "His personal assistant, Brooke Jennings. Young, beautiful, and very good at getting money out of him. Grant has bought her a luxury condo and an expensive car, all in her name." It turned out that while I was silently enduring suffering at home, he was enjoying himself with another woman. Rage washed over me, but I quickly suppressed it. This was no time for jealousy. Every piece of information was a piece in this game. "Do you have proof?" "Of course," Augusta smiled. "We have videos of them going in and out of hotels, bank records of Grant's secret transfers to her. Everything. But we won't use it yet. An ace in the hole should be saved for the most decisive moment." I nodded, trusting her plan completely. Exactly 1 week later, the doctor informed me I was healthy enough to be discharged. Grant and Liliana came to pick me up with happy faces. They thought I was fully recovered, a prey ready to continue their game. As I was packing, I deliberately left a small notebook under my pillow. It was a diary I had started in the hospital. In it, I wrote about my fears, my remorse for causing trouble for my husband and mother-in-law. I wrote that I had realized my mistake and would strive to be a good wife and daughter-in-law from now on. I was sure the suspicious Liliana would not overlook it. Sure enough, that night, while I was in the bathroom, Liliana snuck into my room. Through the crack in the door, I saw her open my diary and read it with a satisfied smirk on her lips. She believed she had completely tamed me. My performance was halfway to success. Over the next few days, I lived like a completely different person. I was no longer silently enduring but proactively submissive. I woke up early to prepare a hearty breakfast for the family. I bought Liliana the most expensive supplements, telling her to take care of her health. I even started asking about Grant's work, feigning interest in his business and offering naive advice. My 180-degree change made Grant and Liliana suspicious at first, but they soon believed I had changed for the baby, that I had become more considerate of the family. In particular, I began to show an excessive interest in Grant's work. I often brought him lunch at the office. Of course, my goal wasn't to care for my husband. I hadn't been to the company in a long time and was surprised. Grant's company had grown much larger. Employees bustled about. Everything seemed very professional, but I knew that behind this shiny facade, worms were eating away at everything. I brought lunch, but my eyes were busy observing my surroundings. I befriended the employees, especially the accounting team. I used my docile and pitiful appearance to gain their sympathy. I complained about being bored at home, about feeling useless for not knowing anything about my husband's work. That was how I became friends with Grace Adler, the head of accounting. She was a middle-aged woman, strict in appearance, but with a very warm look in her eyes. I sensed she didn't particularly like Grant and his friends. I started a more elaborate plan: get close to Grace and win her over. I often brought small gifts for her children and asked about her family. Gradually, Grace opened up to me. One day, during lunch when we were alone in the break room, Grace sighed and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, you have it hard too. You ended up with a husband who only thinks of himself." I seized the opportunity, my eyes filling with tears. "Mrs. Adler, I know, but as a wife, what can I do? I'm just worried about the company. Lately, Grant has been out for business meetings a lot, and it seems he's spending a lot. I'm afraid his bad friends are leading him astray and hurting the company." Grace looked at me with sympathy. After a moment's hesitation, she said in a low voice, "It's true. Many expenses seem strange to me too. Mr. Caldwell has been requesting large sums for entertainment expenses lately, but the receipts are very vague. When I ask, he just tells me to let it go and not ask so many questions." This was the first clue. I knew I was on the right track. I took Grace's hand and said pleadingly, "Mrs. Adler, could you help me? I'm not asking for much. I just want to know if the company is really okay. Could you let me see the books for just a moment? I promise I won't tell anyone. I just want to protect my husband's hard work." Grace looked at me, clearly hesitant. She knew this was against the rules, but seeing my teary eyes and my growing belly, the compassion in her won. She nodded. All right. But just once, and it has to be an absolute secret. I almost cried with joy. I didn't know that Grace's decision that day would not only help me but, in the future, would also save herself. The first secret door of Caldwell Developments had been opened, and I knew that behind it lay a labyrinth of lies and crimes. The opportunity came one Friday afternoon. Grant and most of the employees had left early for the weekend. I used the excuse of bringing dinner to Grace, who often stayed late to work overtime. In the empty accounting office, under a dim yellow light, Grace locked the door and turned on her computer. "You only have 30 minutes, she said, her voice still a bit worried. "I'll keep watch outside." I nodded. My heart was pounding. I sat in her chair, the hand holding the mouse, trembling slightly. Before me unfolded the entire financial world of Grant Caldwell's company, a world he had never allowed me to enter. I didn't know much about accounting, but I wasn't stupid. Following the remote instructions of a financial expert hired by Augusta, I knew what to look for. I focused on the line items for entertainment expenses, marketing costs, and consulting fees. As Grace had said, the numbers here were abnormally high. I opened an Excel file named VIP Partners. Inside was a list of companies, supposedly strategic partners, who were regularly paid for consulting and marketing contracts worth hundreds of thousands, even millions, of dollars. I quickly took screenshots of the list. One name caught my eye. Golden Media Solutions, LLC. This name appeared frequently, with large contracts almost every month. I secretly sent this list of companies to Augusta's people via my phone for them to verify. While waiting, I kept digging. I opened the scanned contract files. Grant's signature was everywhere, bold and confident. But when I opened a contract with Golden Media, I froze at the section for the representative of Party B. A very familiar name, Ryder Stone. Hugo's American counterpart. So that was it. They were in cahoots. This Golden Media company was clearly a shell corporation created to embezzle money from Grant's company. Just then, my phone vibrated softly. It was a message from Augusta. Golden Media, AP, Consulting, MG, Planning. All shell corporations. The representatives are all relatives or close associates of Grant and his friends. Now everything was clear. This wasn't just individual corruption, it was organized crime. They had turned Grant's company into a money laundering machine, a tool to embezzle and divide the profits. I quickly copied all the suspicious contract files and Excel sheets onto a small USB drive I had brought. The 30 minutes flew by. Grace knocked on the door, signaling that time was up. I hurried to close all the windows, delete the access history, and put everything back as it was. I thanked Grace repeatedly and pressed a thick envelope into her hand. "Buy something for the kids. Thank you so much." Grace tried to refuse, but I insisted. "If you don't take it, I won't be at ease. Please consider it a small gift." Leaving Grant's company, I clutched the USB drive in my pocket. It felt like I was holding a ticking time bomb. When this bomb exploded, it would blow everything to smithereens. But I knew this evidence wasn't enough. It could prove Grant engaged in fraudulent business practices, but it wasn't enough to completely sink him in court, especially in a custody battle. I needed something stronger, a killing blow. And I never imagined the next clue would come directly from my mother-in-law, Liliana. After obtaining evidence of Grant's illegal business activities, I continued to play my part, but the internal hatred and contempt made it increasingly difficult to force a fake smile. I was starting to feel exhausted. Fortunately, Liliana, in her excitement over the money she would soon have to pay off her debts, unwittingly handed me an even sharper knife. One afternoon, when we were home alone, Liliana was unusually friendly. She had me sit on the sofa and pulled out an old photo album. "Vera, come look at this." She flipped through the pages, proudly showing off pictures of Grant's childhood. "Look how handsome our Grant was as a little boy. When he grew up, so many daughters from wealthy families chased after him, but he turned them all down and chose you." I forced a smile. I knew she was trying to curry favor, to create a happy family image to manipulate me more easily. Later, when she reached the last page, she paused at a slightly faded photo. In the picture was a young, beautiful woman who looked a lot like Liliana. "Who is this, mother-in-law?" I asked curiously. A complex light flickered in Liliana's eyes, a mixture of pride and a hint of bitterness. "That's Grant's aunt, my younger sister." She sighed. She had a difficult life. She was beautiful and smart, but unlucky. She married a violent gambler and couldn't take it, so she ran away with her son over 10 years ago. We haven't heard from her since. It was a sad story, but something about Liliana's expression wasn't so simple. I asked casually. And what happened to your aunt's husband? Liliana pursed her lips and said dismissively, that man. He fell even further after his wife and son left. I heard he went to prison for some illegal dealings. Died of an illness a few years after he got out. Karma. And the aunt's son. He must be grown up by now, mother-in-law. When I asked about the son, Liliana's expression suddenly changed. She became a little flustered and quickly closed the album. Oh, I don't know about that. We lost contact. She changed the subject. Well, why talk about old things? Are you hungry for anything special? I'll have the maid prepare it. Her evasiveness heightened my suspicions. Why did she react so strangely when talking about her sister's son? I intuitively felt there was a secret behind this story. That night, I called Augusta and told her about the conversation and my suspicions. Godmother, could you look into Liliana's sister and her son? Something is strange. Augusta was silent for a moment on the other end of the line, then said. All right, leave it to me. I know a woman's heart better than anyone. Just a few days later, Augusta called me. Her voice lacked its usual calm, it was filled with rage. Vera, sit down and listen. What I'm about to tell you might shock you. Yes? What happened? Liliana's sister, Augusta's voice hardened, she didn't run away because of her husband's abuse. She died in a car accident 15 years ago. What? I was stunned. And the one who caused the accident was none other than her husband. But the case was strangely closed. The man only served a few years for vehicular manslaughter. According to a source, Liliana arranged everything. My mind was in chaos. Why would Liliana hide the truth about her sister's death? Why would she help the man who killed her sister? And the child? Where is he now? This is the most terrible part. Augusta's voice trembled with anger. After his mother died and his father went to prison, the boy was sent to an orphanage. But just a few months later, the boy disappeared from the orphanage without a trace. No one knows where he went, whether he's alive or dead. And the last person to visit him before he disappeared was Liliana. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A terrible conspiracy, a heinous crime, was slowly being unveiled. The mother-in-law I had lived with for the past few years, Liliana, was not just a greedy and vicious woman, she could be a murderer, a demon in human skin. She killed her sister and got rid of her nephew. For what? For money? For her sister's inheritance? That question swirled in my head, a question only she could answer. The truth about Liliana's past exploded in my mind like a bomb, leaving only desolation and extreme fear. It gave me chills to see that woman who walked in and out of this house every day, who still smiled, talked, and lectured me. Beneath the noble facade of a wealthy lady was a devilish soul and blood-stained hands. I maintained my composure and continued to play my part, but every time I faced her, I had to struggle not to reveal the hatred in my eyes. I knew I was walking on a very thin tightrope. If she realized I knew her secret, I didn't know what madness she might commit. I needed more proof, irrefutable evidence that could lay her crime bare before the law. But how? It all happened 15 years ago, and all traces had probably been erased. While I was at a loss, an unexpected opportunity presented itself. One morning, Liliana received a phone call. I was in the living room, but she seemed to have forgotten my presence, sitting at the nearby dining table. Hello, who is this? Her voice was slightly irritated. Upon hearing something from the other end, I saw her face turn pale. What are you talking about? How did you get my number? She quickly stood up and moved to a corner of the balcony. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but the panic in it was unmistakable. I don't know what you're talking about. That business was settled long ago. What do you want? I pretended not to see, but I strained my ears. I vaguely heard words like money, keep quiet, life. When she finished the call, Liliana came back inside, her face ashen, her hands and feet trembling. She collapsed into a chair and muttered to herself, why? Why is he showing up now? For the rest of the day, she was restless, as if she had lost her mind. That night, she called Grant into her private study and slammed the door. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but when Grant came out, his face was just as tense. He went straight to the bar, poured himself a glass of hard liquor, and downed it in one go. I knew something serious had happened, something related to Liliana's old secret. Someone from the past had returned to blackmail her. I immediately informed Augusta. Augusta moved very quickly. She had all of Liliana's movements monitored, and just 2 days later, Augusta called me. Vera, that woman is making a move. She just withdrew a large sum of money, $550,000 in cash. Tonight at 9, she's meeting a man at a secluded cafe near Bear Mountain State Park. This is our chance. My heart raced. What should I do? I've already had cameras and microphones installed there. But I need you to watch from a safe place. There are things you can only believe if you see them with your own eyes. That night, I lied to Grant, saying I had a headache and wanted to go to bed early. After confirming he had left with his friends, I slipped out of the house. Augusta's car was already waiting. They took me near the designated cafe. Augusta's people were scattered everywhere, disguised as customers. I was led to another hidden car from which I could see the whole situation clearly on a small screen connected to the hidden cameras. At exactly 9 p.m., Liliana arrived. She was dressed in black, wearing a hat and sunglasses, moving furtively like a criminal. She chose a table in the darkest corner. A few minutes later, a man in his 60s, thin and haggard, approached. His face was etched with the lines of a hard life, and a long scar ran across his cheek. "You're on time," the man said in a raspy voice. It was Jonas Kane. "The money. Take it and get out." "Disappear from my sight," Liliana said, trembling, pushing a bag toward him. "And never show your face to me again." The man laughed, a chilling sound. "Disappear? Liliana. Do you think it's that simple? This $550,000 is just the interest for my 15 years of silence. You owe me a lot more. You shameless bastard. That wasn't our deal." "Deal?" The man laughed louder. "Our deal was that I would go to prison for you, that I would take all the blame. In return, you would make sure my son got an education and became a respectable man. And what did you do? You got rid of him. You abandoned my only son. Do you think I'm just going to let you off?" I froze. So, this man was the late aunt's husband, the missing boy's father. And he wasn't the one at fault in the accident. The mastermind was Liliana. "I don't know where he is," Liliana stammered, shaking with fear. "He was adopted by someone else. Don't lie." The man slammed the table. "I've investigated everything. You handed him over to a barren couple near the border and cut off all contact. You sold your own nephew, you demon." Tears started to roll down the man's face. "I lost my wife. Now I've lost my son too. All because of you. Today, I don't need the money. You're going to pay. I'm going to the police. I'm going to tell them the whole truth." With that, he jumped up to leave. Liliana, in a state of extreme panic, grabbed his arm and begged. "No, please. I'll give you more money, whatever you want, but please keep your mouth shut." But the man was no longer listening. In her desperation, Liliana did something insane. She pulled a small, sharp knife from her purse. "If you want to die, I'll grant you your wish," she screamed, lunging at the man. Everything happened in an instant. But at that very moment, the surrounding customers stood up in unison. They were the police officers Augusta had tipped off beforehand. Before Liliana's knife could touch the man's body, her arm was seized in a firm grip. "Liliana Croft, you are under arrest for attempted murder and obstruction of justice." The play was over. Liliana's latest crime was exposed to the light of day. The image of Liliana screaming like a madwoman as she was handcuffed in the cafe was captured in its entirety. This video, along with the testimony of her former brother-in-law, Jonas Kane, and all the evidence we had gathered, formed an irrefutable criminal case file. The old case was reopened, and the terrible truth that had been buried for 15 years finally came to light. Liliana was not only the mastermind behind the car accident that killed her sister but also the person who cruelly sold her own nephew. Her motive was none other than greed. She wanted to keep the entire inheritance their parents had left for both sisters. She bought Jonas Kane's silence with money and a promise to care for his son, a promise she brutally broke. Liliana's arrest shook the high society of New York and Connecticut. The news spread like wildfire. Grant, upon hearing of his mother's arrest, completely fell apart. He rushed to the police station, but it was too late. The empire mother and son had built on lies and crime was beginning to crumble. This was the moment I had been waiting for. While Grant was in turmoil, I launched my final blow. I submitted all the evidence of Grant's corporate embezzlement, the creation of shell companies, and tax fraud to the Economic Crimes Division of the NYPD. At the same time, I filed for divorce, attaching all the proof of his infidelity, the plot to humiliate me, and his complicity in covering up his mother's crimes. A perfect storm raged over Grant Caldwell's head. He had to fight two wars simultaneously, a criminal investigation that could land him in prison, and a divorce lawsuit that could leave him bankrupt. His best friends, Pierce and Ryder, upon hearing about the case, cut off all contact and vanished. The shell companies they had created were quickly discovered, and a network of organized fraud was exposed. Grant was left completely alone. He ran from one contact to another, the ones he was once so proud of, but no one dared to help him. No one wanted to be associated with a disgraced family of criminals. In his desperation, he came to find me again. This time, there was no arrogance, no falsehood. He knelt before me in the same mansion he once considered his kingdom. He cried and begged for forgiveness. "Vera, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, forgive me just this once. Drop the charges. Please, I'll do anything. I'll leave that woman and come back to you and our baby. Just save me this one time." I looked at the man kneeling at my feet, sobbing. His elegant, sophisticated look was gone, leaving only a pathetic, miserable figure. But in my heart, there was not a shred of pity or forgiveness. I gave a cold smile. "Forgiveness? By what right do you utter that word? When you and your depraved friends tried to strip me naked in the middle of the party, did you think of forgiveness? When you conspired with your mother to steal my family's legacy, did you think of forgiveness? And when you knew full well that your mother killed your aunt and got rid of your cousin, and you still kept silent and covered for her, did you think of forgiveness?" Each of my questions was like a blade twisting in his heart. He was speechless. "You don't just owe me an apology, Grant," my voice became firm. "You owe it to my father, to the child in my womb, to your aunt, and to your unfortunate cousin. It's a debt you can't repay in a lifetime." I turned my back on him, not wanting to see his wretched face for another second. "The justice system will handle the rest." Those were my last words to him. Days later, an arrest warrant was issued for Grant for investigation purposes. He was handcuffed and led out of his own company in front of hundreds of employees. At that moment, I knew the game was truly over. I had won. But it was a bitter victory, earned with too many tears and too much pain. After Grant's arrest, I received an unexpected visitor. The woman who had come between us, the assistant named Brooke Jennings, came to find me at Augusta's residence, where I was staying. Her belly was quite large. She didn't have the haughty, triumphant look I had seen in the photos. Her face was gaunt, her eyes swollen from crying. She didn't scream or insult me, she just looked at me with a mixture of resentment and pleading. "Mrs. Caldwell, please," her voice was hoarse. "Save Grant. He's not a completely bad person like you think. He did everything for me and this child." I looked at her and her belly. Complex feelings arose in me. She was also a woman and a future mother. I could understand her fear. But that compassion couldn't erase what she and Grant had done. "You say he did it for you and the child," I asked calmly. "Did you know that the money he used to buy you the condo and the car was embezzled from the company? Did you know how many people he bankrupted to land his big contracts? And did you know how cruel he was to the wife who started with him from nothing?" She lowered her head in silence. She knew, or at least suspected, but chose to close her eyes and enjoy a life of luxury built on lies and the suffering of others. "I can't help him," I said firmly. "He has to pay for what he's done. And as for you and the child, that was your choice. You chose that path, so now you have to face the consequences." I went inside, giving her no further chance to beg. I was not evil, but I was not a saint either. My forgiveness could not extend to those who were complicit in evil. I only hoped the innocent child in her womb could have a better life in the future, untainted by the sins of its parents. The final ray of hope was the news about Grant's missing cousin. With the police investigation and the help of social organizations, a large-scale search was launched, and a miracle happened. They found him, now a young man of 20, in a small fishing town in Maine. He had been adopted by a childless fishing couple, and was living under the name Finian, or Finn. His life had been hard and humble, but he had grown up healthy and had become a good, simple young man. The day of the reunion was a flood of tears. Jonas Kane, released on bail pending trial, hugged the son he had found after so many years and cried like a child. They were tears of regret and belated happiness. I was there too. Seeing Finn, a young man with kind eyes and an innocent smile, my heart ached. He should have had a more prosperous and happy life. I decided to give him a portion of my assets as compensation. I would support him so he could get an education and have a better future. It was the only way I could comfort the soul of Grant's late aunt. Weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from prison. The shaky, crooked handwriting was Grant's. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to bring up anything from the past. But in the end, I did. I wanted to see what this man had to say at the very end. To Vera, by the time you read this, it will all be truly over. I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have no right. I just want to tell you one thing, something you may never believe. I truly loved you. When I met you in that coffee shop, I was genuinely captivated by your purity and your strength. The years we spent building the business together, though hard, were the happiest, most authentic days of my life. But money and fame blinded me. I was caught in a spiral of greed and intrigue, and I destroyed the most precious thing I had with my own hands. I turned our love into a gamble, and I lost everything. I don't expect you to forgive me. I only ask that when our child grows up, you don't tell them their father was a horrible person. Even if it's a lie, just leave them with one beautiful memory. I owe you and our child a lifetime of debt. Goodbye, Grant. I folded the letter without shedding a single tear. His late confession meant nothing to me anymore. The love was dead. Only emptiness remained. He was right, he had lost. But I, the victor, didn't feel happy either. The final trial was held. On charges of organized fraud, embezzlement, defamation, and complicity in covering up a murder, Grant Caldwell and his mother, Liliana Croft, received the harshest sentences. Liliana was sentenced to life in prison. Grant, for his multitude of crimes, also received a life sentence. Grant's friends, Pierce Dalton and Ryder Stone, and others involved in the money laundering also had to pay the price of spending their youth behind bars. Jonas Kane, for his bravery in exposing Liliana's crime and his contribution to finding his son, received leniency. He was sentenced to probation and was reunited with his son. On the day of the sentencing, I didn't go to the courthouse. I didn't want to see their faces again. I learned the news from the paper. When I read the words life in prison, my heart was strangely calm. All the resentment and hatred seemed to vanish with that verdict. I had gotten justice, not just for myself, but for the other victims as well. That was enough. I sat in my new office, looking out at the bustling cityscape. I didn't go back to my old company. I sold it to break completely with the past. Instead, I used a portion of my assets and my knowledge to create an investment fund, specializing in supporting small businesses led by women. I wanted to use my power to help other women so they wouldn't make the same mistakes I did. Just then, Augusta walked in. She was carrying a cup of hot chamomile tea. "What's wrong, child? What are you thinking about?" I smiled and shook my head. "Nothing, godmother. Just feeling that everything is finally, truly over." "It's not the end," Augusta placed the cup on the table. "It's the beginning. A new beginning for you, and for the little angel on the way." She gently stroked my belly, her eyes filled with affection. "Have you thought of a name for my god-granddaughter?" I looked out the window. The first rays of dawn were shining brightly. "Yes," I said, my voice full of hope. "Her name will be Ivy. I wish for her life to always be peaceful and free." Augusta smiled. I smiled too. My life, which had been a storm, had finally anchored in a peaceful harbor. A new dawn was breaking, not just for me, but for the generations to come. 6 months after the trial, my life turned a new page. My belly grew day by day, and I felt the sacred connection with the tiny life developing inside me. All the noise of the past had faded away, leaving only calm and thrilling anticipation. The Phoenix Fund, which I named to commemorate my rising from the ashes, began operations. I didn't involve myself in the daily management, but took on the role of board chair to set the strategy. The day-to-day operations were left to a team of trusted professionals from Augusta's network. I wanted to devote all my time and heart to preparing for the most important role of my life, being a mother. One morning, as I was reading in Augusta's peaceful garden, the butler brought me a package. It was a small wooden box with no return address. I opened it curiously and found an old notebook and a letter inside. The handwriting in the letter was gentle and familiar. I immediately recognized it as Grace Adler's. I quickly opened the letter. "The Mrs. Caldwell. By the time you read this, I will be far away. I'm sorry for leaving without saying goodbye. After everything ended, I felt I no longer had the face to stay at the company and face you. Although I didn't hurt you directly, my silence and passivity in the face of Grant Caldwell's wrongdoings are also a sin. I received too much money from you. I don't deserve it. With that money, I was able to send my daughter to study in the United States to fulfill her dream. With that, I believe I have settled my debt to my daughter. I hesitated a lot about sending you this notebook, but in the end, I decided to. It's a personal log I kept while working for Grant. Inside are probably secrets that even the investigation hasn't uncovered yet. I don't know if this will be of any more help to you, but I believe you have the right to know the whole truth. I wish you and your child all the best. Sincerely, Grace Adler. I quickly opened the notebook. Page after page, Grace had meticulously recorded suspicious transactions, secret meetings, and conspiracies she had accidentally discovered. And on the last page, I read a passage that stunned me. X date of X month. Mr. Caldwell argued with Mrs. Croft again today. I overheard it by chance. Mrs. Croft threatened to reveal the truth about Mr. Caldwell Sr.'s death if he didn't give her money. Mr. Caldwell's father didn't die of a heart attack. What other terrible secret could there be? My body went cold. Grant's father, Mr. Caldwell Sr. I only knew he had died almost 10 years ago, shortly after Liliana and Grant moved in with him, from a sudden heart attack. It was ruled a natural death, and no one suspected anything. But this entry suggested a terrible possibility. Was his death really natural, or was it another covered-up crime? I closed the notebook, my hands trembling. I thought it was all over, but it seemed I had only peeled back one layer of a rotten onion. How many more layers of crime were hidden inside? Grace Adler's notebook, like a ticking time bomb, once again rocked my peaceful life. The secret of my former father-in-law's death haunted me. I spent several sleepless nights debating whether to reopen this case. A part of me whispered that the past was the past, that the wicked had been punished, and that I should live my new life and not get entangled in complex and dangerous matters anymore. But on the other hand, my conscience wouldn't allow it. If it really was a murder, the deceased soul would not rest in peace. And the culprits, even if they were in prison, their crimes would not have fully come to light. Finally, I decided to go to Augusta. She was the only person I could trust and ask for advice. After examining the notebook and listening to my story, Augusta fell into deep thought for a long time. Her face showed deep concern. "Vera, this is not a simple matter," she said seriously. "It happened 10 years ago, all the evidence has probably disappeared. Moreover, the main suspects, Grant and Liliana, are both in prison. Reopening the case will be very difficult and could put you in danger. But if it's true, we can't pretend we don't know." "Godmother," I said with a determined look, "a person's life cannot be forgotten like that." Augusta looked at me and nodded silently. "All right, my child. You've become quite a woman, not just strong, but with a compassionate heart. Very well, if you've made a decision, I'll help you to the end." She picked up the phone and called an old friend, a retired police commissioner who still had great prestige and connections within the force. She explained the whole situation, highlighting the suspicious points and Grace's records. The commissioner on the other end of the line listened very carefully and promised to secretly reopen the investigation from the beginning. The investigation was carried out quietly. I tried not to get distracted, focusing on my pregnancy and managing the investment fund. But every day, I waited anxiously for news. Almost a month later, the commissioner asked Augusta and me to meet him personally. "We've found some breakthroughs," he said in a low, confident voice. "According to medical records, it's true that Mr. Caldwell Sr. had a history of heart disease. But the strange thing is, on the night of his death, only Liliana was at home. Grant was on a business trip. Liliana stated that he had a sudden heart attack and died before the ambulance arrived." "What's strange about it?" I asked impatiently. "We found the paramedic who responded that day. According to his testimony, when he arrived, Liliana was very calm, not showing the panic of someone who had just lost her husband. And he happened to see a strange, unlabeled pill bottle on the nightstand. When he tried to ask about it, Liliana hastily put it away. A strange pill bottle." My heart raced. "That's not all," the commissioner continued. "We've uncovered another shocking fact. Liliana was not Mr. Caldwell Sr.'s legal wife. She was just his mistress. Mr. Caldwell's legal wife had passed away shortly before from a chronic illness. According to the will Mr. Caldwell left, his entire fortune would be inherited by his only son, Grant Caldwell. But there was a clause. Grant could only exercise full inheritance rights upon turning 30. If Mr. Caldwell died before that, the estate would be managed by a trust committee, and Liliana would not receive a single cent. It all fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The motive was too clear. Liliana was with Mr. Caldwell but had no legal status or assets. She was afraid of being kicked out empty-handed. If Mr. Caldwell died just before Grant turned 30, as Grant's sole guardian, she could control the entire fortune. We suspect Liliana murdered Mr. Caldwell using some kind of poison that can induce symptoms similar to a heart attack, the commissioner concluded. But to prove it, we need the final piece of evidence. We need her own confession. Getting a confession from a cunning fox like Liliana was not easy, especially in prison. She would admit nothing. She would continue to proclaim her innocence and curse me for ruining her family. But the police had their methods. They didn't use torture but psychological warfare. They showed her current photos of Grant, suffering and despairing in prison. They told her that if she confessed frankly, they could consider a reduced sentence, and she would have a chance to see her son sooner. But the masterstroke was when they had Grant's cousin, Finn, meet with her. That good, simple young man knelt before the woman who had destroyed his entire family, without a single word of reproach. He only asked one question, "Auntie, why did you do that to my mother? What wrong did my mother ever do to you?" That innocent, painful question was what completely broke down Liliana's last line of defense. She looked at Finn. She saw the image of her unfortunate sister and of her own nephew whom she had cruelly abandoned. She rested her head on the table and began to sob. And between sobs, she confessed everything. She admitted she had put a poison she bought on the black market into Mr. Caldwell Sr.'s tea. She sat calmly and watched him writhe in pain until his last breath. She staged the perfect drama of a sudden heart attack. A terrible crime that had been buried for 10 years finally came to light. A special trial was held. Liliana went from being an inmate to the defendant in a murder case. With her confession and irrefutable evidence, she received another verdict. A verdict befitting her crime. Life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Grant, upon learning the truth about his father's death, completely broke down. The mother he had so respected and for whom he had covered up all her crimes was his own father's murderer. When his last faith crumbled, he went mad in prison. On the day Liliana was sentenced, I didn't go to the courthouse. I sat at home. I lit incense before the portrait of my parents. Beside it, I also placed photos of my late aunt-in-law and my unfortunate former father-in-law. I whispered, "It's all over. May you all rest in peace." The longest nightmare had finally ended. Justice, though delayed, had finally been fully served. My heart felt peaceful and light. I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for the souls who had died unjustly. Time is indeed a mysterious force. It doesn't erase scars, but it covers them with a thin layer of forgetfulness. It wears down the sharp edges of pain and finally returns all things to their original justice. After the final trial, when the media storm and the days of psychological warfare passed, my life slowly returned to an orbit of calm. But I knew that for those who had sown the wind, the reaping of the whirlwind was just beginning. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The web they wove themselves with greed and malice finally trapped them with no escape. The first to drink the bitter cup was, unsurprisingly, Grant Caldwell, the man who was once my entire world, the husband I loved with all my innocence and passion. Now, he was just a cold name in a prison registry. The life sentence was the final period on the ostentatious life he had built on lies. Sometimes, news of him would reach me through my lawyer. He was no longer the arrogant, powerful CEO. The four cold walls of his cell quickly stripped away his shiny shell, revealing a miserable loser. For the first few months, he remained defiant, shouting and cursing, claiming it was all my fault and his mother's conspiracy. He still believed that with his remaining contacts and money, he could appeal and turn the tables. But when his appeal was dismissed, when the friends and partners who once praised him turned their backs one by one, and when no one but his court-appointed lawyer visited, he began to realize the game was truly over. He had lost completely. They say he grew silent. He would spend hours staring at a spot on the cracked wall. He lost a drastic amount of weight, and his once shining black hair turned gray. His eyes, once filled with calculation, became deep and empty. At night, he had nightmares, screaming names in his sleep, my name, his murdered aunts, and even his father's, whom he never truly knew. The conscience he had tried to bury under a shell of success now gnawed at him every day, every hour. The last letter he sent me, with its words of late remorse, was likely one of his rare moments of lucidity. But even that was soon swallowed by the darkness of despair. He had destroyed everything with his own hands, his business, his family, his love, and himself. The rest of his life would be nothing but a long succession of days of regret and solitude, a steep price, but the natural consequence of his sins. The fate of his accomplices was no better. Brooke Jennings, Grant's mistress who dreamed of becoming the lady of the house once I was out of the picture, had a rude awakening. After Grant's arrest, the luxury condo, the expensive car, and everything he had bought with illegal funds were confiscated. With a growing belly, she suddenly found herself with nothing. No company would hire someone involved in such a major financial scandal. Rejected by society and disowned by her family back home out of shame, she had to give birth alone in a public hospital. After the baby was born, she moved into a tiny attic apartment in a poor neighborhood, where I heard she struggled daily with diapers, formula, and a precarious existence. Her former glamour and haughtiness were gone, leaving only a haggard woman burdened by the weight of survival. I don't know if she regretted her choices, but I believe every time she looked at her innocent child, she couldn't help but remember the price of building happiness on the suffering of others. Grant's depraved friends, Pierce Dalton and Ryder Stone, who reveled in my humiliation and participated in his dirty dealings, did not escape their punishment. When Grant's case exploded, their names were all over the news. The shell companies they had created to launder money were quickly investigated. Though they didn't receive sentences as severe as Grant's, they faced massive fines and penalties, sufficient to bankrupt them. But their harshest punishment came from the high society they were so proud of. They became pariahs. No partner wanted to do business with them. No friend wanted to see them. Everywhere they went, they were pointed at. Ruin and loss of reputation, that was the price they paid. I once saw Ryder from a distance. He was no longer driving a sports car or wearing designer suits. He was sitting alone in a dive bar, his face gaunt and his beard unkempt, drinking desperately. The price of selling one's integrity for vulgar pleasures was the emptiness and meaninglessness of a life without direction. And finally, the source of all evil, Liliana Croft. For a woman her age, a life sentence was the end. The shock of her crimes being revealed, her only son's imprisonment, and the loss of her entire fortune completely destroyed her already weakened body. In prison, she was constantly ill. From a lady waited on by servants, she had to live in a harsh, miserable environment. But the physical suffering was nothing compared to the mental torment. The ghosts of her murdered sister, her sold nephew, and the husband she poisoned haunted her every night. They say she would scream and rave at night, calling for her sister, her nephew, then cursing and crying. Late remorse turned her final years into a living hell. She died alone and miserable in the prison infirmary. On the day of her death, no family came to claim her body. Not even her son, Grant, for whom she had sacrificed everything, could attend. She was forgotten, just like the crimes she tried to bury. When I heard of her death, I felt no satisfaction, only a void and a sense of sadness. Greed had turned a human into a demon, and in the end, that same greed devoured her. It was a tragic, vicious cycle, a costly lesson in karma. Amid the dark picture of retribution, there was one ray of light. Grant's unfortunate cousin, Finn. After reuniting with his father, his life completely changed. With the money I secretly provided and the help of sponsors, Jonas Kane and his son started a new life. They didn't return to the city but stayed in the fishing town and opened a small shop. Jonas, who had lived with guilt for years, found peace beside his son. He dedicated the rest of his life to him. Finn, for his part, completed his education through GED exams and learned the trade of a boat mechanic, becoming a competent technician. He often called me, his voice no longer shy but full of joy and gratitude. He told me about his work, his new friends, his plans for the future. Sometimes he would send me fresh seafood he had caught himself for me and my daughter. Seeing him reclaim his life filled my heart with warmth. At least in this tragedy, one innocent person had found happiness. I sat in my office and leafed through the case file again. The names, faces, destinies intertwined like a tragic novel. Karma. People say it's a supernatural punishment, the invisible hand of fate. But I see it differently. Karma isn't something that falls from the sky, it's the inevitable result of the choices and actions each human sows. Grant, Liliana, and their friends chose the path of lies, greed, and cruelty. And the end they received was ruin, loneliness, and suffering. It wasn't punishment, it was justice. All resentment was now truly resolved not by forgiveness, but by justice. The past was behind me, and the door to the future was wide open. I knew that from now on, my life would only be filled with chapters of peace and hope. When the final aftershocks of my life's earthquake passed, the ground beneath my feet stopped trembling. In its place, I felt a solidity and calm I hadn't experienced in a long time. The sky after a storm is always clearer and higher. And my dawn, my true dawn, had finally arrived. Not just bright, but also warm, with the warmth of rebirth and hope. I did not revel in victory, nor did I let the pleasure of revenge stain my soul. Instead, I chose to move forward, to build a new future with my own hands, a life where I was no longer a victim or a judge, but a creator of happiness for myself and those around me. A few months after the final trial, I welcomed a little angel into my life. My daughter, Ivy Wren, was born, surrounded by the love of me and my godmother. The first time I held her in my arms, feeling that warm little life move in my lap, it was as if all the pain and wounds of the past were healed. She had my dark eyes, but the high forehead and radiant smile of her maternal grandmother, whom she never met. Looking at her, I knew I had won the most precious treasure in the world. A reason to live, to fight, to be a better person. She wasn't just my daughter, she was a symbol of a new beginning, a tenacious life force sprouting from the ashes of destruction. I didn't return to the old company stained with betrayal and painful memories. I sold it, along with the Greenwich mansion. I wanted to completely sever ties with the past, leaving behind everything that belonged to Grant Caldwell and his family. With the divorce settlement and my own assets, I could have lived a life of carefree luxury, but I didn't. The lesson from my mother and my own experiences taught me that money can be a useful tool, but it can never buy peace of heart. Instead of pursuing material wealth, I decided to seek something more valuable, a purpose. I used a considerable portion of my assets to establish the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing free legal and psychological counseling to women who were victims of domestic violence and fraudulent marriages. I wanted to use my own story and painful experiences to light a flame of help for other women, to let them know they are not alone, that they have the right to be protected, and that they have the strength to stand up and rebuild their lives. My godmother, Augusta, became the foundation's advisor. Her wisdom, experience, and connections helped Phoenix quickly establish itself and have a significant social impact. We organized seminars, legal clinics, and created a safe house for women in need of emergency shelter. Every case helped, every smile recovered from tears brought me infinite joy and peace. I transformed my own pain into a force for the community, and that was the best way to heal myself. Parallel to the foundation, I started my own business, a business without the shadow of any man. I didn't choose the tumultuous path of big business again. Instead, I returned to a quiet passion I had harbored since college, art. I opened a small gallery named Ivy, not just to showcase the works of talented young painters but also as a place to hold free art classes for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. I wanted to sow the seeds of beauty and creativity in their souls, so that art could heal wounds and give wings to dreams. My life was now busy but very peaceful. In the mornings, I played with my daughter, watching her explore the world with her clear eyes. During the day, I would go to the gallery and immerse myself in the world of colors and creative ideas. In the evenings, I worked on the foundation, reading files, listening to stories, and finding solutions with the team. Sometimes Augusta would drop by with delicious food and valuable advice. We would sit together, 3 generations of women, sharing stories and laughter. My home was no longer a cold mansion but a true sanctuary filled with love and laughter. One weekend afternoon, while I was clumsily painting with Ivy in the garden, Finn, Grant's cousin, came to visit. He was no longer the shy young man from the countryside. After 2 years of study with my and Augusta's help, he had graduated with honors in engineering and was now working as a competent mechanical engineer at a large naval company. He brought Ivy a wooden model ship he had made himself. "Thank you, Vera," he said with a sincere voice. "If it weren't for you, I would have never left that fishing village. You gave me a new life." "Don't say that," I smiled. "It was through your own efforts. I'm very proud of you." Seeing the strong, good young man in front of me, my heart felt truly warm. The whirlpool of the Caldwell family's sins had not stained his pure soul. He was proof that even in the darkest environment, goodness and willpower can sprout and grow. Life went on like this, peacefully. I no longer thought much about the past. It had become a page in an old book, a lesson learned. I no longer hated Grant or Liliana. I only felt pity for those lives that had self-destructed due to greed. I learned to forgive, not for them, but for myself, to no longer carry the weight of hatred, so my soul could be peaceful and free. One day, looking through old photos of my mother, I found one of her as a young woman with an unknown man. They were smiling happily, and the way they looked at each other was full of affection. On the back, a handwritten note said, "Memory of Nantucket, 1990. I suddenly realized I knew almost nothing about my mother's life before she met my father. I asked Augusta, holding the photo. She looked at it, her eyes growing nostalgic. "That was your mother's first love," she told me. "A poor but very talented painter. They loved each other deeply but had to separate due to family opposition and differences in status." Augusta's story surprised me. It turned out my mother also had a past, a bittersweet love story. I suddenly understood that even the strongest women have their own hidden corners and heartaches. Love doesn't always have a happy ending, but what matters is how we face it, how we stand up after a fall, and continue to live a meaningful life. I didn't try to find the man in the photo. I respected my mother's past. Instead, I decided to take a trip. I took Ivy and Augusta to that island of love and memories, Nantucket. We walked along the beach, watched the dune grass sway in the wind, and visited a small gallery on a secluded hill. In the quiet space, among the colorful landscapes, I felt a strange connection to my late mother. It was as if I could see that young woman, full of love and hope, walking these same streets. That night, we sat in a small cafe, watching the city lights twinkle like a galaxy. Ivy was sleeping soundly in my arms. Augusta said softly, "Seeing you now, I think of your mother. She would be so proud of you." I smiled with contentment. Yes, I think Mom would be proud too. I didn't let life's tragedy destroy me. I stood up stronger and lived a life brighter than she could have ever hoped. I no longer search for a safe harbor in another man. I have created that harbor for myself. It is not a castle or a business empire. It is the freedom of the soul, the joy of work, the laughter of my daughter, and the unconditional love of my loved ones. My new dawn is not a destination, it is the journey itself.